Nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Because I know for a fact that we don't, because there's no intro line to say. So and we're not saying that's that anymore. So we do the clap. So we go, look at that. You're seeing the brains cog. You're seeing the brains cog.
Brains cog.
Yeah.
Cogging brains. Coggers.
Oh, she has a good set of coggers, she does. That sounded as bad as I wanted it to sound. I'm so happy with that. There we go. Welcome to Silly Whales. This is a mental health podcast where we talk about things that are a little bit on the sensitive side. This podcast is for everyone, but it might not be for you. What do I mean by that? Well, we discuss things to do with the world of mental health, be it news related to mental health conditions, our own personal experiences, and that might not be for you, and that is okay. That is okay. I'm not going to elbow you in the face. Joe is not going to knee you in the stomach. That's the only thing I could think of that is mildly threatening at this present moment in time, you know. But
doesn't say I can't elbow you in the face or he can't knee you in the stomach. There, I mean,
exactly.
We've left that option available.
But you know, we love it if you're here with us, and if you don't want to be here with us, that is also okay. There's a whole world of entertainment and informative material and things that you can digest, and it doesn't have to be us. That's what I'm pretty much saying. Okay, that's what I'm pretty much saying. It's been a while. First show of the new year. We are recording this 11 days in. I'm hoping this will be uploaded 13 days in. So, inshallah. I know that.
We sort of missed the opportunity to be like, oh, this is a year since we started recording, because this is definitely slightly over a year since we start our first ever recording. But I think we're recording on the day that we put out our first like podcast last year. I think that was on the 11th. So we're at least somewhat keeping to something. But yeah, this is a whole year since we first started this, which is crazy to think about, actually.
It's a year of Silly Whales. And I'm just going through our Discord server, and for some reason, I posted a lot about Anthony Jeselnik in the Discord server, mainly because I think you look like him.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, just trying to figure out a date of when we started recording for the first time and things like that. But yeah, we've been doing this show for a whole year, and it is insane how many people have had some form of effect from the show, how many people have interacted with me like in person, and the reviews we've gotten from people, and just the general small audience that we are slowly building. And I think it being a whole year in, all we can really say is thank you, because at the end of the year, the very last day, the 31st of December, we reached 1,000 listeners. It was great. So, Yay. Thank you. And I haven't pushed this show a lot without, like, I haven't pushed the show on Instagram or anything. I haven't done anything like that. I've just been like, hey, I'm going to upload it, share it on Reddit a few times, and we go from there. So, again, thank you ever so much for that. And thank you for existing.
No, thank you.
But yeah,
all right.
So now we're back in the year 2025. It's been a very interesting start of our year, but the show, season 2, remains the same. And is there anything you want to say before we get into mental health this week, Joe? Actually,
no, let's go for it, man. Let's start strong.
So if you saw if you saw the last episode of 2024, then you know the show's changed a little bit, and we do things slightly differently here, which means we do things like this. This is Mental Health This Week. We take all the things to do with mental health in and around the world of mental health this week, and we congest it and we'll do things with it, and it's here. Yeah. Okay? It's here.
Did you mean condense when you said congest?
Okay. Exactly. Okay? Okay.
All right, brilliant.
Anyway, we have lots of different articles and different things in our lives that we like to bring to this. So we want to start things off with something actually very, very, very important. That is the mental health bill that's currently in the process of being discussed by various different parliamentary committees. And it is very important, especially in terms of things like hospitalization and overall detention in terms of mental health welfare, how we look after people, how we decide whether people should remain as an inpatient or whether they should be held in certain different centers, be it a mental health center, be it even prison, and how we want to reform that and make changes to that.
Well said. Very well said. Okay, fine. I'll keep going. So, it goes over a lot of things. I believe based upon the obviously we will put in links for all of this as we are now doing, as Alex is painstakingly doing. The NHS Confederation has kind of gone over like key points and sort of given underlying explanations for why certain things need to change. Hopefully we'll also put in the actual like original Mental Health Act that's being reformed prior to its being reformed. They go over the fact that the bill will probably only contain minor changes from a draft that's already been made. So if you want to get an idea of maybe what the future looks like, then the 2022 draft mental health bill as in the NHS Confederation website will probably be the way to go there. But they go over lots of explanations of it. This goes from this is largely about the ability to detain people and the fact that it was incredibly sort of systemically racist, largely speaking, and that there is a continuing need to reflect modern understanding of mental illness as it posits. So making sure that it's a little bit harder to just detain someone. Like there were certain like lines that were legally very difficult to explain what they even meant, and they're going to be taken out. And then there's also, in terms of like having an explanation of, okay, well, what does it mean to be someone who, as it puts it, if I can, when I find it, someone who is the inclusion of likelihood of harm and how soon it will occur in the detention criteria has been removed. Other things like this, because it's just not very useful language, like legally. And when we're talking about legal stuff, because we've done this twice in a row now, and I like bringing up this stuff. And in general, I think the reason why we even mention this at all is because this is probably one of the things that's going to pass you by in terms of like any details and things like that. So it's worth mentioning. And making sure that the bar for detention will be higher. So making sure it is not just as easy. So this is a big thing in terms of just kind of preventing people with authority from just kind of like taking away someone's autonomy very quickly when without much effort or need to kind of explain themselves or justify it. Making sure that people with learning disabilities and people who are autistic have like maximum detention can only be detained for so long, rather, as you said, like changing, as you mentioned about prisons or police stations being used, now those are no longer safe spaces to be included, so therefore these will not be so people won't be detained in these sorts of environments the same way, and also lots of things around trying to have more community inclusivity, whether it be services or provisions, essentially trying to create a more kind of social welfare dynamic, or not social welfare, but social, the language escapes me for how to describe this, but sort of a more social recognition and social ability to kind of engage and talk about this, while also at the same time providing like the ability for people to come forward if they feel that they're under especially I think for generations that maybe haven't grown up as we have with as much kind of recognition, like kind of contemporarily, of some of these disorders. Obviously, we are growing up now, or like we are looking at the generation earlier and now realizing that they're getting more than we ever had. But there are generations above us as well. And so kind of keeping that going and continuing to inform on that and improve on that, I think it's a very is a big deal. They're essentially going to go line by line, like it is what has been said. Like they're going to go line by line and basically like do all of the reform stuff. Again, there's already been a draft, so they're largely going to stay to that. But this is an incredibly important thing, and this kind of stuff needs to happen probably quite regularly. Obviously, the reason why this initiated was because of the was specifically because of the fact that there was a stark disparity on when being used for detention rates when being used for ethnic minority groups as opposed to, you know, like white people. So, and as followed in 2018, so this is a long time coming, the independent review of the Mental Health Act. And then the other main driver was also just to reduce detention rates in general, because what we want to do, I guess, as a society, but if you think about it purely from the perspective of, you know, being someone who is going to have these powers used on you, you would rather it never actually be used, like some of these detaining powers and so on. The idea of, you know, preventing it from happening before it can happen, you know, like rather than like coming in at to sort of quote unquote save the day by getting rid of the problem when you're actually not doing that at all. You've allowed the problem to fester, and then you've got someone now who is in a really bad state, and you're now removing them from society and all of these other sorts of things. Again, there's so many versions of this. Like when we talk about homelessness, for example, there's a very similar like precept that we want to avoid there being people who are on the streets, not we want to take people who are on the streets like off of the streets so that we don't see them anymore. Like, there's a very big difference between the two, but easily that can be confused. It can be confused in people's like from people's views that like making homeless people not be around so you can't see them might feel like you're solving a problem, but in fact you're just making a sort of class of untouchables that you're removing from society and kind of demonizing. So yeah, very much the same kind of metric and explanation there. Yeah. So really important. This is, again, if it wasn't for the fact that we were doing this, I probably wouldn't be that aware about this. So I like that we're chatting about
this is also leads into stories like Alexis Quinn, who was the former like youth swimmer who represented GB and was also a teacher.
Oh yeah.
And she went in originally for 3 days and ended up spending over 3 years pretty much held in a mental asylum against her will. I said, well, the asylum's a bit outdated, but in this context, for her, it might as well have been that she wasn't allowed access to her own daughter. She wasn't allowed access to anything outside of those things, to the point where she literally had to catch an escape, run into a car, get into that car, drive to Dover, go to France, and she ended up in Lagos, Nigeria. So all to escape the quote-unquote mental health care system that was supposed to help her. Mm-hmm. We do not want those things to happen. I have personal friends who have had very, very strong experiences where they've been held against their will without the ability to have the agency to make their own choices. And a lot of these come, especially in Alexis' case. Alexis, she had autism, so she was put in an environment in which there was sensory overload, which made her symptoms worse. And if you want to know more, I'll put a link to an article as well as a whole podcast series done by Sky News on this. So I think every single step we make to giving people agency and giving people the ability to form their own opinions and to make their own choices about their own healthcare and their own well-being, be it physical and be it mental, is a step forward, especially in terms of progressive policies. This is as progressive as we can get, giving people the ability to make their own choices. So hopefully this passes without any sort of hitches.
Yeah, it's such a easy mistake made, or not even mistake made, but I think there's just this underlying narrative that's been consistent throughout for a long time. Let's just say, like through a lot of human history, about where like people put into a situation where which is horrible and causes great pain is then. And the actions they take as a result of being in those spaces is then used as the like metric for why they need to be punished or why they need to be or why they need to be demonized and so on. It's like it's so easy to like, you know, I remember this being used and when talking about the idea of like people in war, for example. This is like quite a tangent, but I this metaphor I think is quite useful with describing the idea of like of the idea of beating people down in a situation and then reacting really, really severely when they do things that might when they retaliate by crossing lines that maybe they shouldn't, with the idea of, yeah, but you can't just like, if you have someone on the ground and you're standing on their neck and then they try to like, and then they try to attack you while you're not looking, you know, then you can't be like, well, I've got you on your neck, but you can't attack me while I'm not a willing participant in this fight. Like you can't sucker punch me. And it's like, well, what do you mean you're on their neck? Like what they, you know, it's a very, it's not an easy. It's too easy to basically play the card of, oh, someone has done something that is bad, therefore they should be kind of recognized under the same like jurisdiction by which you would recognize someone who actually doesn't have any of the kinds of difficulties that they might, and that we should recognize that there is a big difference, especially when we're talking about things like mental health and disorders, especially because these things are not stuff we can choose. So yeah. It's so incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that again, especially when it comes to learning disabilities and things along the lines of autism, there was significant cases where people with those conditions were held for years at a time. So we, as a society, we cannot allow that to happen again, and we can't allow this to continue to happen. So this is the step in the right direction.
On the topic of sort of social, or not even social, but like kind of this attempt to try and understand this, do we want to talk about Cumbria?
Yeah. So, picture this, okay? You're 20-something years old, and you have sticky fingers. You go into Tesco, and you go, hey, there's some naan bread, and I'm going to steal it. And you pick it up, put it in your bag, and you get caught. You get arrested, and the police are there, hey, you jam teeth. And they say, hey, do you know what? We're going to screen you for ADHD. And that starts a cycle in which you end up with a diagnosis of ADHD, and your whole life turns around, and everything is great, and you are now a productive member of society, no longer stealing naan breads from Tesco. That is the utopian viewpoint of what this project is. So, it's been trialed before in London, and it's now being trialed in Cumbria. They are introducing ADHD screenings to people who have been caught and then put in temporary prison, waiting charges, things like that. So, I pointed out that example there. We could have people being screened for ADHD and possibly even diagnosed later on by the police. Now, this is going to be controversial. I have...
Not by the police, I just want to point out, because
police, correct.
There's no diagnosis by the police. It's merely that they can, because that has to be done by a medical professional. I like when you say, like, yes, later on, like, correct, a medical professional can. But it's more like getting referenced by the police, if that makes sense.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to get in. Is there anything more factual based that you want to say before we get into the opinion side of it?
I don't know, because I didn't get to read all of the, like, any, like, what the City of London version of this looked like. If there has been some benefit, then, you know, I mean, the main thing I will say is that a lot of this comes from, or at least like a big part of this comes from Dame Sally Coates. I don't know them like by their work or anything like that. In 2021, they made a report for the prison watchdog, Her Majesty's, I forget what IP stands for there, but regardless, HMIP, suggested at least 50% of prisoners could have, this is very specific, could have some form of neurodivergence. So this is kind of the, let's put it that this is sort of the impetus supposedly for maybe why this is entering it, why they're entering into this. I also want to say that I'm not super against part of this, at least theoretically. but there's a lot more as like the actual how this happened. So I'll go back to you now.
So again, this is a slippery slope as we're dealing with things that could end up leading to misdiagnosis, or just in general, where and how does this come into place? I'll be interested to see how it progresses. I think it's too early for us here to be like, this is a bad thing, this is a wrong thing. Effectively, it's a screening, and they'll be using a checklist created by the charity ADHD Liberty, and their whole criteria is based along the lines of people in incarceration, a lot of them, as you mentioned, Joe, having neurodivergence. And I can't get the words right today. That's my issue today. The words aren't working. And
it's been a while.
The general issue that I'm having is, when are they being screened, and what's the criteria for them being screened? Because this could help people in terms of the Crown Prosecution Service. I referenced the Nambre story for a very simple reason. There's so many reasons why somebody will go into Tesco and steal food. So is it a matter of, do the police look at the circumstances in which they were arrested and say, hey, we should we should screen this person for ADHD? Or is it a case of, whoever we arrest, we're just going to screen them anyway? Because the idea is that it's a simple test that takes 5 minutes.
I would bet. Sorry, just maybe I'm cutting you off. I apologize.
No, you're not.
I would bet that the actual. This is only based off like things I have heard, that I could be allowed to say, hopefully, about like just how kind of things are run in these systems. Obviously, there's lots of checklists and stuff that I know is done. I don't know how. Like, obviously, this is a pilot, so the pilot probably has their own idea of it. When in actual like practice, maybe beyond a pilot, there's kind of what I feel like it's going to be used more sparingly than more commonly, and maybe there'll be specific things pushing towards it. Because ultimately, I don't think it's something that people like. You know, what I'm trying to say is, I think people are a little bit lazy on doing stuff like this, to the extent that I think people will be somewhat lazy, or a little bit kind of here or there about when they choose to do screening like this. Maybe it depends on how long the person's around for, in like, for, you know, being detained for, or whatever. Like, I could see this being something that maybe past a certain point, like as you say, like if they're sort of waiting upon the point of charges, that I think absolutely probably there. And again, maybe there'll be a sort of a guideline of what kind of crimes. Now that's where it gets weird, because at least for me, from where I think of it as, at what point are we putting ADHD into a stereotype as far as like what to be looked for if we're going to do that? If we're not doing it universally, then like doing a screening like that universally, then how do we, then obviously there has to be a set of ideas as to, you know, what do you look for and what do you expect is more likely to produce a positive result? Because I think this is the unfortunate bias of these things. I think that the standard is that people tend to use stuff like this when they think it's going to get a positive result, or when they think it's more likely to yield something, because people don't want to do something and get negative results. That's generally not how it works, aside from like going to a hospital. But even then, a lot of people go to the hospital expecting that they have something, and if they didn't have that thing, that would shock them, right? Or that's not what they're kind of going to the hospital for, quote unquote. So I think there's like a bias that exists there. So it would have to be pretty universal and have to be something that was used for everyone. So that there is a lot of dependency, I guess, there, and I would like it probably not to be allowed for like someone to just kind of decide when to use it or not. And to that extent, that's the reason why I can kind of see where this would be useful, because I can see a situation, not just because, yes, there may be a larger proportion of prisoners that are neurodivergent than compared to like the general population, even though I don't really know if that's true. It's more so, I think, the fact that lots of people who end up in sort of like in these sorts of situations are just kind of like not necessarily being like around individuals who could actually find a way of helping them. That doesn't mean that like this will clear that up, because like you said, there's lots of reasons why, and just being diagnosed with ADHD is not going to solve like poverty, for example. So that's not a reasonable that's not going to clear crime for that reason. So yeah, I think I don't think of it as being, well, at least in my head, I don't think of it as being this like as being much of a panacea or much of a cure for crime, as much as I think of it as being more of like giving a pamphlet to someone who is kind of going down potentially a problematic path, whether we're talking about it from a moral standpoint or whether we just talk about it from, hey, even though you might have every good reason to do what you're doing, at the end of the day, like, you're going to get fucked by the society in the end if you don't find a way out of it. And it's not necessarily your fault, just sincerely, that's what's going to happen. So it's like giving a pamphlet to someone in that situation, and maybe there's a way in which they can be recognized separately for it. But I think, honestly, for that to even be true, we would probably have to have way more outside of just being diagnosed with ADHD to reach a point where even giving someone an ADHD diagnosis would be that useful, if you know what I mean. Like, there needs to be more support elsewhere for something like this to matter. So it's not. Yeah, I maybe I'm not as maybe I'm looking at it slightly differently, but that's like my level of kind of like cynicism around it.
Yeah, my cynicism is like, it's a trial period, so I'm very open to it existing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also want it to succeed because I want things like this to succeed.
Yeah.
By pure optimism. However, I want it to also create a pathway, because if the problem is a mental health problem, then we have to figure out why the crime is committed in relation to the mental health problem. Like, then it requires a lot of help, and that requires a working system.
Yes.
A working healthcare system, which we do not have. So what's going to happen is you're going to say, hey, we're going to do an ADHD screening test. You're going to fill it out. And then you're going to be like, hey, we recommend you get a diagnosis for ADHD by a healthcare professional. And then you're going to get added to a waiting list of up to 3 years. So in that time, you are most likely going to become a repeat offender. Mm-hmm. But also, the fact that it could be used to help the Crown Prosecution Service weigh up their charges for and against you, just against you, sorry, makes me ask the question of, is there much point? Because are we now going to look at this and say, oh, this person stole the naan bread from Tesco, but this screening says that they might have ADHD, so we're going to remove the sentencing. We're not going to bother sentencing them, and we're going to make them we're going to give them an unofficial caution, because giving them an actual sentence and charging them with something or whatever could then lead to their lives being heavily impacted for stealing fucking naan bread. Because that could save a life. But then, again, as we've discussed, how and when will this be used? Personally, I share your cynicism.
Yeah, I feel it's more like I've shared your cynicism as we've discussed it. But I think, as always with these kinds of things, and maybe this is just what we're trying to point out by even talking about it in this way, is that lots of things sound better than they are, like, in practice. And it's more to do with, and again, it's not to do with the fact that because it is like inherently flawed. It's more a case of they're flawed due to the fact that they can't do what they say they want to do, but it's not because it's, again, inherently flawed, but it's because something else is flawed, or the expectations that they put on something isn't going to happen, and so on and so forth. Like, you find this in workplaces a lot. I find where you're like, oh, this system should work well given all the guidelines and the expectations that we have, and then you realize that there's not enough people to do all those things. And you're like, oh, so I can't do that. Like, we just can't run a system in the way that is expected, because there isn't even enough people to do this job, like to do all of these things. And yet, so there's this like really fine line that is constantly being like walked, where people are kind of like going along with the system and then not going along with the system, and like and as a result, like you're just left in this sort of limbo of any moment someone could come along and check what you're doing and then find out that it's not being done correctly, but they're never going to look at the number of people in your workplace, for example, as the reason why it's not being done. It's just, hey, who did it? It's your fault. You're the one to blame or whatever for not doing it. And I think that can, and again, in a very similar way, I think this could be, this should not be considered like a idol for the idea that like, oh, if this doesn't, like, oh, we have this in place and yet this person still isn't, is still like, not, this person was like screened and said that they probably do have ADHD, and yet they still like repeat offended, and then kind of using that as either to say, oh, this is completely useless, or to say this is great, the person is the one at fault. Like it's not really too often like things could be used as pillars for bad arguments and things like that. So anyway, that was my
So here we are. This is you.
This is me.
The next one.
Yeah, so this is a conversation that I have thought about in the past. I'm trying to think like now when I started realizing some of this, maybe like 10 years ago actually, which is insane to say. Stress, like personal stress indicators. The idea of just knowing when you're feeling stress. This is a conversation that I've had with my parents, or with at least a parent, and like family, friends, and things like that, about realizing when you yourself are going through some shit. And it's funny because sometimes you don't realize like that you're experiencing it, and then sometimes it's just a case of helping other people recognize that you're going through it so that they can kind of treat you better. So a good example I'll give, and I was experiencing this today, so this is and we'll go over that later, but I was experiencing this today. So this is a really like an example I know is true and has existed throughout my life, and this one is consistent as opposed to some of the ones that have changed over time, is that I tend to become, I don't know the right way of saying this, it's like socially mute, like the correct way of saying it, or like I basically stop talking like to people. And I don't mean that in the way that maybe I've discussed previously on this podcast with I stopped communicating with people like over messaging and things like that, and I like stopped, like, yes, that is true, like me like not picking up the phone and not answering messages and things like that. That is an example of this. But there's actually a very particular one, which is like I can be around people physically and I kind of stop talking. Like I my brain shuts off like a social part of itself, and I kind of coast through without really like engaging in like social conversation and things like that. Like today, I spent almost all of it saying absolutely nothing to anyone, and someone would come by me and they would say something, or in a situation I know I would say something to them, I just shut the fuck, like there was just nothing that would come out my mouth. Like I noticed the moment going by as it happened, and then realized I didn't say anything. And that's like a personal one I've noticed, that there's this, I was trying to think today whether this was a useful way of saying it, is like become my more introverted like tendencies coming out. And I don't know if that's true because I'm still interested in being social. But it's more like I need a lot more like kind of warming to the process of actually like speaking. Because I can have a conversation with a stranger, no problem. But I need kind of a bit more like of a sort of, I don't know, I need more of like a punch from externally to like make me do that, if you know what I mean. Whereas like I'll just kind of like coast through like not engaging at all and being very, very insular. And I realized that made me feel worse, you know, like it just makes me feel worse. And it's one of those stress like mechanics or like those kind of defensive behaviors you take up that will cause you issues. And I think that's the main thing. If you notice, if these are the kinds of things you're experiencing, it's worth recognizing which ones are like good for you and which ones aren't. like knowing, okay, this is a bad behavior to have because it's not making me feel better. But it can also be like, okay, I'll allow myself to do this for a little bit, but then I have to like find a way to get myself out of it, because maybe it's like, yeah, it's nice to be able to be on my own a little bit more, not feel like I have to put out the energy, because that's really what it was. I just didn't want to like use up energy. Like I clearly was dealing something with my head. I wasn't going to use energy to like explain myself or engage with people and have to think about engaging with other people, even at a very like fundamentally basic level where it feels natural and comfortable. And so my brain just shut that off. I don't know if you have versions of this, because that's what I was kind of interested in, and just kind of opening up this discussion in general. Like, I guess at this point, like behaviors you might have, or something akin to that.
I think, it depends on where I'm at. Like, irascible, very prone to outburst as a key one. But even then, like those are day-to-day behaviors, but they're never really sustained in a way that I can pinpoint. I think I will find really annoying things, like really, really overwhelmingly frustrating. So
like
slow
irritable
walkers, yeah, irritability, but like to a point where it's overflowing, because there's being irritable, and then there's like wishing death on a whole family,
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm like, things that really frustrate me is when I'm cycling and like someone's on their phone, like that rightfully so gets me really frustrated and really annoyed. Somebody taking their time walking and they're walking in the middle of the fucking pavement. If I'm like not having a great day, that's me. I'm internally boiling here, I want to like kick their legs out. You shouldn't be walking. I hate you. You're taking up space. Just stick to the fucking side of the road. Things like that. And those are like pretty good indicators, because when I'm feeling super chill and super calm, I don't really pay attention to anybody else.
Right.
So it's those things. Yeah, like I get really annoyed at people being inconsiderate. So,
which is very reasonable, of course. But like you said, like there's a difference between how you feel, like in terms of what like mental setting, like set you're in, like the set you're in, the mental state that you're in, like, and why, and like whether or not that's something you're even gonna like focus on for any period of time. Like, and you still go, oh, that guy is an asshole, but you can move on in a different way when your life is, when you've got other things to think about that are more pleasurable and interesting, right? And when you're not, like, honestly, like that one in particular, because I have it as well, where when I'm feeling better, I don't tend to get as bothered by like people at work, for example. But I think partly that's because it's almost better to be like angry at something, because that can almost feel better than the experience than the neutral experience that you're having at the moment, because that neutral experience is quite bad for you at the moment. And so it's almost like a procrastination of like, if I focus on this thing, then I don't have to focus on anything else. To mirror this as well, there's also like physical things. So I know that there's things associated a lot with anxiety. This is a big one that is, I think most people might know, because I remember at school, I used to have like a lot. I used to have like stomach pains a lot. I don't know if you ever had anything like this, but I used to have like really bad stomach pains quite regularly when I was at school. And that was like fucking, obviously, like I was incredibly stressed and anxious at that point in my life. Again, I don't know. There's probably a point where it stopped being so much the case, but I remember it vividly. And I remember going to the GP about it and actually getting almost nothing, to be honest, as a response, even though I kind of explained, even though by that point, I think my mum also went with me and we kind of explained what we thought it was, and that these were like sort of phantom, like, I don't know if phantom pain is the right word actually for that. No, it isn't, because my stomach is in fact there. But the feeling of anxiety causing your sympathetic nervous system to go into overdrive and then your stomach contracting is a good example. There was actually for a period of time, and it hasn't come back for a while, so I don't know if this is if this will ever come back. But I used to get like a big rash under my eye and things like that. In specific area around my eye used to really like flare up during like times of stress. I think when I was about like 19 to 24 or something like that, it used to come up a lot more. Really fucking annoying, by the way. It's really annoying to get like a really obvious indicator that other people can see and is really itchy and irritating. I think anyone who experiences like kind of physical symptoms in relation to internal moving forces like that it will know what I mean, and that it's incredibly irritating in a kind of different way, because it's like a wound. It's like a wound is being opened further than what you already know is a problem in your life. And everything like this, the reason I think it is important is because and again, this might work for me and not work for everyone else, but I find that if I understand when my body is in an overdrive like that, or when I'm dealing with those kinds of issues. Actually, let me just quickly say before I mention that, I've also had an issue in my life of not being able to tell internal stimulus very well. Somewhat related to like alexithymia, and there's another word, again an A word, because that always means not, or like an inability. Like where I'm not very good at being able to tell what my kind of homeostatic condition is. So like at a mental level. So for example, I'm not very good at telling when I'm thirsty. I'm not very good at telling when I'm hungry and things like that, which means that I can very easily get distracted and just not take care of myself is the main thing. This is especially true during when I was anxious and when I was depressed. It is probably like, I say depressed, when I was much more depressed than anything I could call whatever my feelings might be now, here and there. And it's probably quite common across people with those who suffer from those things. So I think if you can start to notice when it's the worst, like the moments when you're... for me, it's always important, because knowing that has always been like, oh, okay, this is actually a really big indication that there is definitely something wrong one way or another, whether it be a physical symptom or a behavioral symptom. And I'm like, okay, that means I can, at the very least, recognize that the thoughts I'm having in my head aren't necessarily the good ones before they come up. Like I can kind of set myself a realistic like expectation of what I'm thinking. Like of how to assess how I am as a person and how I'm thinking as a person, and maybe get ahead of the curve. Curb. I don't know which one's correct actually. Of that. And nowadays, now that I'm in a much better state and I can actually be aware of like, oh, what makes me feel happier, or what can help me out of those states, is much more useful now, because I can sometimes, though not always, put myself in the position to be engaged with in that way, like to whether it's with you and friends, or whether it's to like go outside for a walk and things like that, and so on. Like I said, we'll talk a little bit about this anyway in the next bit, but I think I just like this topic, and I wonder if anyone has any good stories or get any good like experiences of this, and can like send an email to us, or even just kind of like, or even put in comments. Spotify has comments. I don't know how long it's had them for, but we can use those. So have a go at using them.
Yeah, cool. I have nothing more to add on that one. So I guess it's time for the journal. Welcome to the journal. This is a bit where we talk about how we're doing throughout the week. This is how Silly Worlds used to be. Now it's a little condensed moment of the show. Who's going first, Joe?
You're going first. Actually, no, I'll go first.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. You go first.
Cool. I did a social. Yay. I was in the gym and I was training with random strangers, I'm pushing myself to be more social in a productive way. So I was at the gym, guys were doing Muay Thai and they invited me to train with them and it was fun. I did a bit of MMA sparring as well, which is hilarious because to be doing any form of mixed martial arts is funny. Like me kicking somebody and then trying to take them down is a hilarious sight. So now, at some point, I have to do a mixed martial arts fight because I just think it'd be really funny. That's it, really.
To give context, by the way, what do you mean by, because you just say like you hang with them, but from my understanding, that's what you do at the gym anyway. So what specifically do you mean?
When I go to the gym, I do my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
There were some guys training and they were like sparring and they invited me to join. And I was like, hey, sure, I will join. And normally when I'm at the gym, I do weights and I hit the heavy bag and I go home. I don't normally work out with people. Like, I don't train with people in the gym. So me sparring with people who I don't know outside of my Muay Thai gym is a difference maker.
Oh, I see what you're saying now. Because I was thinking Muay Thai gym, because you would say gym for that. I get you now. People at your like normal, like run of the like, yeah.
So yeah, that was a good, nice social step, and we will take it. And that was really it. I've been listening to Last Girls Exist, Volume 1 on repeat, and I think I don't know what that means for my mental state. I think that means I'm in a weird, I'm going to say an emerging state, which means that things are probably getting somewhat better, but I don't know. I
like
not
that
know.
word.
I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you at all. And that's it, really. Nothing much to really add. It's been a very tepid start to the year.
That sounds better than tepid. Just, from my perspective. But, fair dues, fair dues.
I want roller coasters, Joe.
Oh, God, I don't want to go down on your roller coaster.
That sounds really sexual for no reason.
It does. I think just going down is not a good word you want to use if you don't want to sound sexual. Yeah, so so I'm finally sad. Which is to say that so beforehand, during the Christmas episode, we spoke about, you asked me, how am I feeling? How have I been? And I said I've been all right. And that was true. And I kind of explained that I generally feel it a lot more in January and February. That is still true, as I can confirm. In relative terms, I'm still much better than I otherwise would be. Like, I to put into perspective, like, I can remember, certainly as a student, truly, this is funny because I experienced this like before March of 2020, when we then went home because of COVID, where I just was for like February, for all of January, and then I think for like a good deal of February, I was not in a good state, and I was largely kind of quite isolating myself a lot, and very rarely like leaving my room without the expectation that I'm basically gonna like very quickly dart into the bathroom and then hopefully not have anyone see me. That was I always like, it's so sad to think now, like when I think about, and even last year I was a bit like this, to think about that. And even now, so now I'm not feeling that. Like, I'm very comfortable in my house right now with that, in that respect, where I feel like, even in my worst times, I don't feel as bad. Like, I can feel it creeping up in the background sometimes. So I'm starting to feel that. I actually, to be honest, play a lot of this to the fact that I recently damaged my ears, and in particular my left ear, which not only meant that I didn't go to work as much that week, but also meant that I was just in pain and really pissed off. I've had this had never come up before, but I've had a long standing history of ear infections and operations on my ears, getting grommets for people who know what that is. For my eardrums, I've had, I think, 4 operations on my ears, some of them on both, some of them on one. I think the first one was when I was like 1 year old. I obviously don't remember it. But either way, when I was very young. So I know what being under anesthetic is like quite regularly, not to mention all the teeth stuff I've had. I think I've been under like 8 or 7 times like at this point in my life. But nothing for anything too crazy. But as a result, I'm quite hyper aware of the fact now that my ears are shit. They're weak. And they damage easily. So I'm taking precautions with the weather having been so shit. Basically, that's the what I believe it is, because I remember kind of when it happened, and I think that the damage must have occurred, because it's incredibly dry and cold, which are both things that are really obviously bad for what is desired to be a warm and humid environment, which is inside your ears. And luckily it didn't become too bad. It wasn't like as bad as it could have been, like a huge infection. But my left ear is producing a lot of wax to try and protect itself, so it's making it very hard to hear sometimes. Which is, again, very annoying and unfortunate. But I know that since it's not so bad, it will recover in time, and by the end of this month, it will be. I will have no memory of what it was like, the pain was like, until the next time it happens. So I'm still, I've still got that level of optimism. Luckily, the job does put me in the position where I'm still, even though it's dark when I'm out, hey, I'm still light when I leave. It's still very good there. And I'm on a new rota, which will hopefully be really good for my job, for my personal mental health. But apart from that, it's just, not so great. But I'm looking forward. And speaking of looking forward, with a sense of optimism, there's a lot of things that are going to happen this year, kind of around the same thing. I don't know. I can't remember if we've spoken about this, but Kessis is getting married. Is
that okay to say on the show?
Yeah, I think that's fine. And that's a big deal because, I say it's a big deal. It's a big deal for them, obviously. It's not a big deal for me in the sense of I don't put a huge amount of weight on marriage, especially. But it's a big deal because of the potential of what this might mean going forward, and also means that sort of planning stuff, and there's going to be a wedding, obviously, and this is going to be the first wedding that I've been to in my life that's not like a family member that I have like some level of connection, but not really, like this is like where I'm kind of like, where it's like, oh, I'm there because I should be there because of some tradition, not because the person necessarily like really wants me there, whereas now it's like, oh no, I wanted to be there and I'm going to be the best man and all of this other sort of stuff. So, it's going to be quite a year. It's quite a pivotal year in that respect. Also, the year is just a round number and it's a square number. So I just naturally am putting a bias on the year as to hopefully it will be good for me. I'm not saying that the world will necessarily be great. I always feel like I have to mention that or say that when it comes to these sorts of things, because I mean, 2020 was a round number and that was shit. So, and politics has been pretty bad for the last like however long. So yeah, like I'm not expecting good things for this year, really, in the larger scope. But in terms of like personal, actually, I should say this as well. In terms of personal growth or personal like movement, I'm we're second year in this podcast, which I think is actually quite a pivotal moment because we've done the introductory stage and now of like doing this and kind of trying to set up a routine around it. And now we're kind of doing it as like an actual thing where we understand what we're doing. also I've left the job that I had to get in order to move here. So I'm out of that, and now I have a bit more of a footing and so on in Worcester. And the idea of like finding work is now something I'm a little bit more comfortable with here. And because my mental health is better, I think I'm actually going to be better at both doing that and have like more of a motivation too. So like from a personal perspective, I see this year as being quite as potentially being quite revolutionary. It's not to say that it will be, and I'm not like making New Year's resolutions or anything like that for it. Not until Chinese New Year. But for the purpose of kind of making an assessment of like where I think I'm going personally, and then hopefully where you're going and where we're all like kind of tending towards, I think it makes sense that we. I think there's something to say that it makes that I see kind of like a positive like direction. Like I'm no longer in the position where I'm just trying to get out of something bad. Do you know what I mean? Like that's kind of been my life up till now. And now I feel like I'm actually in kind of a stable state where any movement I make is in a positive direction above zero, not just trying to get rid of the negative shit like I was previously. So that for me is like crazy already. To come to that conclusion.
Yeah, we discussed this on the winter episode. I just never really care for the new year and all that stuff. So I'm not offering a lot. It's hard to offer much.
Well, let me ask you this then, because obviously I'm not asking you to put like much emphasis on the fact that this is a new year, but what kind of things do you want to do this year? Like just like think of it as a measurement of time. Like this is a unit, this is a year. What kinds of things are you maybe looking to be doing more or whatever? Like what's your kind of standard, I suppose?
Get this show pumping and going well, and fighting somebody at some point.
Okay, that's a good one. Is there is there an idea of like when you would do that? I'm curious.
My issue's always been putting a time limit on things. I want to do this by this time. I've never been able to do anything by that time.
Yeah,
so
true.
I wanted to get 1,000 listens by the end of the year, and we did that. And that's one of the few wins I have over the last 6 years. So, because whenever I have like the tiny wins, I have a massive defeat. So it's like, well, I have to restructure the L's that I take, and maybe amplify the small wins more. Who knows? But yeah.
Speaking of L's, by the way, you said, "Oh, I want to get in a fight, like a sanctioned fight." I assume. Are you? That's not you saying I want to win a fight. You just say you want to get in one. So
yeah,
you don't really care one way or the other, I assume.
No, like it's hard. Yeah, sure, winning would be great, but I'm not gonna sit and be like, I want to win my first fight, and then like have that whole I'm guaranteed a victory thing. I am very much of the belief that, and this is why I hate this stuff, because I'm gonna get the whole you have to believe it, you're gonna win. Shut the fuck up. Like,
yeah, shut up.
like there's no barrier that's stopping the guy from throwing a double spinning back kick to my head. The question isn't about what they're going to do and what I'm going to do. The question is about the reaction to what they're going to do and what I'm going to do. It's not about the belief and the mindset and all that stuff. It's about being well trained and being able to handle any sort of pressure that's there. And the case in point is simple. You see the best fighters in the world crumble under immense pressure.
Mm-hmm.
You see the best fighters in the world crumble under zero pressure. Shit happens. Oh, it's his mindset. It's his mindset. Well, could well be. It could just be that the other guy's really fucking good. You know,
Yeah,
who knows?
I agree.
Who knows?
The world is the universe is too chaotic to try to make sense of it by just saying that someone needs to believe harder. It's just not. To me, it's too naive of how everything works to just use that as the fall.
Yeah. I guess we'll end the episode on this. Genuinely, my head is not in the right place for the usual standard of silly world. So I do apologize if it's not up to your standards. I did get rocked at sparring a little bit. That's probably what it is. I could feel it. So it's taking the time to look after yourself is great, which is what I'm kind of forced to do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's one thing I would say for the year, it's how best can I look after myself? Cool. And can I maintain that for a long period of time? That's one thing. Can we sustain those things? Rather than, I'm going to do this new thing. I'm going to start this new thing. I'm going to do this new that. I'm going to do this new that. It's no point, Yeah, who knows?
Wow, you actually did manage to answer the question of expectations for the year. That's actually perfectly said.
There we go.
Maintaining what we already had.
It is time for Choo Choo Recommendation Station. You're written down first, so you're going to go first.
No, you're going to go first now.
No, you're going first now.
All right. I want to recommend Crashout Heritage.
You fucking cunt.
Go on. Do it.
You're going to talk for 45 minutes about fucking Shogun Showdown.
No, I'm not. Come on.
Cool. Ray Vaughn dropped a track that's on YouTube, Crashout Heritage. This is everyone. And then also Billy Ocean, because, why the fuck not? Red Light Spells Danger. 2 great songs. Enjoy them. Have fun.
Shogun Showdown is a roguelike game. Play it. The music is fucking bumping. Listen to it on the Shogun Showdown OST on Spotify if you don't want to play the game. If you're not interested in games, it's still good. And yeah, no, it's a fun game. There's a lot to it. I've been having a lot of fun recently with it.
And that's that. We're going to take 2 steps to the rear and get out of here. We're in the wind. See ya.
Joe, it's actually a roguelite, not a roguelike. You messed up. No, I'm kidding. See ya.
Free Lucy, let me.